Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the People That Might Be Interesting podcast. And it's all in the name. We go out, we look out into the world, and we find people that have something to say. People that might be, well, interesting. Today I have a fun guest. But first, before I get into that, this is how you reach us. Follow us on Twitter at PTMBI Podcast. That's PTMBI Podcast. You can always email us, ptmbi@protonmail.com. I really appreciate it. I love it when people reach out. I love it when people follow us and challenge us. If I say something that's wrong, let me know all about it. Please let us know what you think. If you have suggestions for people that might be interesting, I'm all ears. I really want to know. Today's guest I'm really excited about. His name is Todd Pipes, and he was the lead singer and bass player for the band Deep Blue Something. Now, you've heard of them. Even if that's not ringing a bell, you know them. They had the hit song, the top 10 song, Breakfast at Tiffany's. And just having said that, you're hearing that melody in your head. I know you are. That was the song that everybody knew was a big hit. And the album was actually great. I bought the album. I had the album. I listened to that album like crazy. From start to finish, it's a great disc. Then the band kind of went away. But they didn't stop making music. They didn't stop participating in the scene. They've been record producers of music that you might not necessarily think. They've owned music studios. It's been a very long ride for them, and they've done a lot of interesting things. And I have Todd tonight, and he's a super cool guy, and he's really fun, and he has a lot of insight. Now, I'm not delving too deep into the story that you're going to find all over the internet. Their story's been told. That story of the band and of that song has been told. I'm trying to get a little deeper. I'm trying to get a little into what happened to them maybe behind the scenes a little bit. What perspective has that given them on how you are on a label? And are labels still important? What's going on in the music scene today? What do they think is important for musicians to know? And going forward, what should musicians think about in the future? Anyway, this is a fun one. Todd's a fun guy to talk to. He's a very smart guy. This is one you got to pay attention to. This is a guy that's got a lot of things to say. So I think you're going to like it. And here we go. Hey, everybody. This is awesome. I'm really excited. I have with me today Todd Pipes from the band Deep Blue Something. Todd, how you doing?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you for coming on. And to give you the 10-second version of what kind of got me thinking was I had my box of CDs, because everybody has that somewhere in their basement or their garage, their box of CDs, because they've moved over to, streaming or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And right at the top, when I opened it, because I wanted to get nostalgic for a second, so I opened up the box, and there was Home right on top, literally the one facing right at me.
Oh, nice.
And I went, God, I love that album. I'm going to go plug that in on playlist. And then it got me thinking, and I went to see if you had a Twitter profile, and the rest is history, as it were.
All right.
But I really appreciate you coming on, and I kind of want to go about this maybe a little different way than kind of the behind the music type thing. I really wanted to kind of talk to you about your opinions, because the more I learned about you, you never left the music industry.
Right. Yeah. So I kind of transitioned. Well, it was sort of weird, because after we had made the Home record, Interscope, the whole music industry was really changing, and there was a lot of panic. And so it took quite a while for our second record to come out. And sort of in that process, my brother and I started producing. We opened a studio, which had, basically grown out of our overgrown rehearsal area, and started producing. And the second I started doing that, I felt like, oh, okay, maybe my time as a recording artist and a touring performer is going to be limited, because I love this. Because we had grown up with kind of the little 4-track cassette recorders as teenagers. And so as soon as I had any money, I bought recording gear. And so it kind of grew out of that. And So even though the band kind of took its time, I mean, the record eventually came out and we had another one, that kind of thing. But my mind was already on production. And so I just seamlessly went from one thing to the other.
Well, that's interesting because I want to get there, but let's kind of start back in the day. And as I was sitting down, writing down all of my questions, I got kind of wrapped up in where I was at the time and where the music industry was going at the time. And you kind of mentioned the panic. So it distilled down to the question for me. So, and if this is probably a challenging one, what kind of band was Deep Blue Something? If you had to put it into a label that your A&R guy would be like, oh, here's where you're going to fit. What kind of band was Deep Blue Something, or is Deep Blue Something?
That was the problem, ultimately, because we looked at every song as sort of a musical sort of journey or an experiment, that kind of thing. And so if like I had written Breakfast at Tiffany's, and it was a fairly jangly pop song, but very much in the context of what we were doing, much in the same way that, Friday I'm in Love is still a Cure song. It's just not super indicative of everything. Now, the Cure had the benefit of having lots of songs come out before that. So, for us, a lot of people, that's all they know. And so that was really our problem, is because we were musically all over the place. Now, with that said, our roots were always kind of in that early post-punk quasi-goth period, like Bauhaus and The Cure, and, later on the Jesus and Mary chain, and, Sisters of Mercy and all that kind of stuff. So, and a lot of our songs are that way. And all these years later, we're finally kind of turning back in earnest that direction. But yeah, that was always our problem, is that it would have been a lot easier if we had fit into a genre. Yeah, that was kind of a long explanation for not having an answer.
No, that's kind of what I was looking for, because I was sitting down and I was thinking about, okay, where was I? So this was 1995. So I was an undergrad at the time. And I remember the day I walked in my high school. So this would have been like 91, 92 was when Nirvana hit. And I was completely oblivious to Nirvana. I was all about Metallica and Megadeth and Guns N' Roses. And
oh, sure.
That's where I was. And I remember walking in one day and looking around the Commons, which was like the lunch area in my high school. And all these kids are wearing Pearl Jam and Nirvana shirts.
Right.
And I remember that happening. And I remember looking to my buddy and go, what the hell happened? And why didn't I notice? And I literally, that was the day I had never heard Smells Like Teen Spirit. Right. That afternoon, I heard it on the radio for the first time. I remember it. And I go, what is this? I don't get this. And then, of course, time goes on. And so alternative was a thing. I don't know when grunge turned into alternative, but it seemed like that was the era that was really going on. And were you an alternative band? Or could you have been?
No, we definitely were. We definitely came up through the alternative charts and the alternative radio first. So we had to kind of, once we got to a certain level, it crossed over into the pop charts. And once you do that, sadly, it's very difficult to ever return. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because, 2 years before grunge hit, which would have been 90, 91, just as all that was starting, I thought the musical landscape was incredible because it was all over the place. I mean, you would have, I remember at that particular time, Gene Loves Jezebel had a really big hit.
Yeah.
There was Jesus Jones. We still kind of had the Happy Mondays thing hanging over a bit, and Soup Dragons, which we were all into that in an incredible we are dedicated to that genre kind of thing. And then at the same time, Ned's Atomic Dustbin, and as you mentioned, Metallica and the heavier side of things, which I listen to a lot as well. I still do to this day. Metal is one of my favorite genres. But there seemed to be room for everyone. And then all of a sudden, you get Pearl Jam and Nirvana. Well, then everything else has to immediately disappear. Like our metal station in Dallas which was Z-Rock, stopped, and everything sort of morphed into this. And I was like, well, if this band had come out 2 years ago, they would have just been a hard rock band. But now they're grunge. And what does this mean? Because you have kind of the Mudhoney Nirvana side of things, but that sounds completely different from Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. But they're both grunge, and they're both going to push everything out. And I remember as that happening, a lot of the bands in the Dallas area were all putting on their flannel and stuff and growing their hair long. And I remember getting into this argument with this guy in a band that was going, I don't even understand that jangly nonsense you're doing. Grunge is now. Grunge is the future. And I was going, oh, hey, man, look, by the time you get anywhere, grunge is going to be over. Let's see where you are and let's see where I am in 5 years. So I'm glad we stuck to it. But, man, we were going against the grain, which is funny to think that we are somehow an alternative to the alternative, being very jangly and poppy. It was a very strange position to be in, but man, we didn't fit in. I'm just glad we didn't bend towards that, I guess.
So you guys were signed to Interscope, and which is a label that is largely known for urban music, and they did have a run of the real alternative stuff. Mm-hmm. But at some point, some A&R guy, which Interscope was allegedly famous for really being run by A&R guys and bands. So they said. At some point, somebody said, hey, there's this band from Texas. I want to sign them. And whether you go to their roster from, 94, 95, or you go to their roster today, I don't see a place for Deep Blue Something in there. How did that come about?
Okay, so we were rejected by all the labels. Our manager had taken the record around, had played it for everyone, and some of them had even said, "Oh, I get this. This is good. That tune would work, except this is not the right time for it. So I'm sorry. As good a song as I think this could be, it's just not." And everyone rejected us. Well, so the record comes out, it somehow miraculously finds itself on the radio, and we just start selling tons of CDs. And it's sound scanning like legitimate in-store sales. And all of a sudden, all these record companies just descend, which is great because that creates the bidding war, and that's where things get really interesting. Now, the reason we went with Interscope was that they had Primus, and we were all Primus fans, and we figured,
I love that album.
Oh my gosh, Sailing Seas of Cheese and Frizzle Fry. Frizzle Fry, I think is I like that record a little bit better, but we figured, okay, so they found a way to get this crazy band in front of us. If they can sign a band like Primus and market them in such a way that they're actually popular, they've got to be a good label. And that's the reason we signed with them. It was literally because of Primus.
Wow. Not two bands you put next to each other, but there you go.
It's true, but we figured, and they did, we went out to meet them, and they were, we're all about the music, man, and all this kind of stuff. And it was a little bit, I don't know how to put this. Where are you based, by the way, if you don't mind me asking?
Chicago. So basically,
okay, Chicago. Okay, perfect.
It's me and then Corn all the way to Iowa.
Okay, good. Chicago's a fantastic town. Okay, so the problem was they were a little kind of, hey man, California, and everything was just maybe a little too laid back, but yeah, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It really, really does.
Even the 2-hour time lag, it was like, dear God, just get up and get some work done. So they did great. I mean, they eventually, got us in front of people and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we signed because of Primus. So I guess that's as good a reason as any.
Yeah, that's a great reason. So you're signed, you're on Interscope, you're on a major label. Mm-hmm. You have a big hit. And obviously when you have a big hit, the label loves you. Was their decision making kind of transparent, or was it, here you go out and tour and sell more records, and we're gonna throw you a couple of music videos? Or how was that relationship? Was it transparent? Was it good? Or was it just kind of, okay, go do your thing?
Oh, well, okay. So the one of the main talking points with them was, hey, we're actually not going to release Breakfast at Tiffany's first. It will climb too fast, it will burn too bright, and it will kill everything else you do. We're actually going to release Halo first, establish the band, it's going to be successful, and then we hit them with Breakfast at Tiffany's, and then you're established. We thought, great, that sounds like a fantastic plan.
That's the appetite for destruction model.
Exactly. And we were sold on that. The only problem is, as soon as we got signed, we noticed that they're working Breakfast at Tiffany's. And we're like, and they start talking about making a video for it. And we're like, I thought we were doing Halo first. Well, it's already taken off at radio, so we might as well just go ahead and jump on it. I was like, okay, but this is, you know what I'm saying? It was immediately not going the way they said. And you're just kind of like, okay, and it wasn't wave a magic wand. We're Interscope Records, play them on the radio. I mean, God, the amount of conference rooms we played in and 6 a.m. radio acoustic performances. I mean, playing in distribution hubs. And I mean, we worked it. We worked and we're just ground it out. But yeah, it was just that part I was immediately kind of disillusioned a little bit. I thought, okay, because it wasn't, I tell people all the time, our band would have responded better if we had walked into those offices and it had been a big fat dude in a white 3-piece suit smoking a cigar and, boys, I got a plan. This is how the entertainment business works. But it wasn't that. It was, hey, man, path of least resistance. And you're like, okay, great. That kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, totally. So that relationship is going on. In the meantime, Interscope is Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch and Tupac Shakur and all of that other stuff.
Yeah.
As the music industry kind of, or at least as them as a label, started going the other way, when did you start feeling like, okay, there's some distance here between us and Interscope?
Well, it wasn't an overt thing, because again, we were selling records. The relationship was great. The problem was, when we were out on tour, the label changed hands 3 times.
Yeah. Universal, A&M. God, I know I'm out of order there. Yeah.
Warner, Elektra Atlantic, Warner Brothers proper, Interscope alone. I mean, so as we were out on the road, you would come back or in various territories, all of a sudden, we were with this label a minute ago and now we're not. Like, that's the reason we never went to Australia and Japan, is because it had been released under Interscope, Warner Elektra Atlantic, and all of a sudden we were Interscope Universal. And they were like, well, the record's already come out. We don't need you to, we don't want to promote a band that we no longer have. And we're like, okay. And then the Universal response was, well, we don't own the record there, so we don't want to promote you to go there for a record we don't own. And we're like, okay, so we're number 2 in Australia and Japan, and we're not going to go? Yeah. Like, you know what I mean?
That's so crazy.
It wasn't like there was animosity. It was just the big business of things. And it was just kind of like, wow, okay, well, this is how this goes. And then when all that, later on, when the Napster stuff happens, that's when things got really complicated. So, it was bizarre.
So the big hit, touring for years.
Yeah.
Then it comes time to record the new album. It was called Byzantium. Right. And, but it never got released, at least not in the U.S. And I've spent like the last week trying to find it. Just trying to get it, and I couldn't find it.
It's. I think that there are some. It definitely gets traded around on the internet. It's sort of. I think it's like 95% on Spotify. I think there's one song missing, but it's listed as Byzantium. But that was okay. So that was the big problem. We had finally, they demoed us to death and finally felt like we had something. We went and made this record, and what we didn't know was already underway. This would have been like 98. Was that the Napster thing was already happening. It hadn't made the news yet, but the record companies were already going, what the heck is happening? And so they're firing whole floors of record companies, like in a building, just a whole floor. You're done, And so your A&R guy's kind of cowering under his desk, trying to not get fired. And so when the label is somewhat hesitant, they're not going to stick their neck out and say, hey, you have to release this, and it's part of their contract. So things got really hairy because they didn't know what to do. If you notice, around the same time, the Wallflowers should have had another record, and they didn't.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, and the only bands that did were Bush and No Doubt, but they weren't technically on Interscope. They were on Interscope Trauma, and so Trauma was kind of just doing their own thing. Interscope was not. They were trying to negotiate and leverage and figure out what was happening, but that's why the record eventually was lost. The only thing is, when we finally, parted ways with the label, we at least, because of our contract and the amount of records we had sold, we got the record back, so it wasn't just lost in the midst of time. But
so you own Home then? You own all of the songs?
No, not Home. Byzantium.
Okay.
Yeah. No, Interscope's never gonna give up.
Sorry.
The thing is a cash cow. Yeah. They would. Nobody in their right mind would sell that thing. Boy, that would be handy.
Sorry, didn't mean to go down that road there.
No, it's fine. Oh man, yeah, that would be funny.
So, all right, let's jump forward in time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the era of labels and big bands and big hair and big money and big contracts and big lawyers and big limos and big guitars. And so that was that era.
Yeah.
Now we jump forward to 2020.
Yes.
And there's lots going on, and there's lots to dive in with this, but it's right now the best players in the world. And I'm a terrible musician, but I like watching musicians on YouTube and trying to learn things. And it seems like the best musicians in the world today aren't playing in bands. They have YouTube channels with 8 million followers, and there's no incentive to be in a band anymore. And it seems like maybe there's even a disincentive to be in a band.
Yeah. Yeah, because it used to be, bands would sign fairly bad. Even a good record contract is not exactly super fair. But you would get money up front. You might sell a lot of records, and there's money to be made, that kind of thing. Well, signing bonuses and record budgets and all that kind of thing just simply don't exist. The incentive has disappeared. I mean, there's still artists who who get really famous, but it's sort of the middle ground artists that have a super hard time gaining any traction. It's not to say that it can't be done, but, back in the day, you could play a show, maybe make $200, like when you're first starting, and maybe, make a record on your own, and then you can sell a CD for $10. Well, you've done two things. One, you sell 10 CDs, you've got enough gas to get to the next town, or some T-shirts. And then you also have, 10 fans for next time. So it's kind of this reciprocating thing. Every time you come through a town, you can just, build and build and build as a totally independent artist. And then the next tier would be signing to an indie label, and then, maybe onto a major. But now that's not there. Why on earth would anyone buy product? You can Spotify it or whatever like that. And yes, eventually, once you have 10 million plays, you make some money. But it's in that beginning phase. that it's crucial for a band to just be able to survive, that they're not making it. And a lot of times if there is success, it's because it's sort of producer based. The producer has found this artist, they have developed it, they've got some credibility based on some other projects, and maybe it gets a little hype and everyone just prays that it takes off. But yeah, it's a very, very different time.
Are you on Idol Records now? Or you've had a relationship with Idol Records, but are you
Idol is just for my solo stuff.
Okay. Because Idol's a pretty big indie label. So
yes.
Is Deep Blue Something signed to a label?
No, we our drummer John has a label called Kirtland Records, but and it's a bit more kind of focused on catalog and placement and that kind of thing. But we made it, and our last EP came out on Kirtland Records. But for these last two singles and moving forward, we're just releasing under ourselves, more as an experiment. And it seems to kind of work, we're just going to kind of make songs and release them individually and kind of see what happens. And then, use a publicity company or something like that as needed. But the whole label idea in some ways, I think, is going to fade, I think.
Well, my follow-up, and I think you might have just touched on it there, is what does a label bring to the table now? Because, for example, it used to be that there were recording studios, and the recording studios were, $2,000 an hour. Maybe a little one was less than that, and you could certainly spend, $10,000 an hour. But so you had a label, so there was like this gatekeeper that said, okay, if you want to get into this studio that has the best preamps and the best drum room and the best vocal room, you're going to have to be on a real label because only they can book time here, because you're not going to have enough money to do that. But now, I have a crappy little studio in my basement, and you have a very nice studio, and it's one of those things where so many of the gatekeepers are gone. Is there any reason to have a label anymore?
Well, that's the thing. So the label traditionally would have brought to the table more than anything else just kind of working capital. We had a time actually, with Breakfast at Tiffany's and Home that we thought about not signing, because our manager was like, look, this is going to happen anyway. And you could sell 1/10 as many records and make more money. And our whole dilemma where we were is that we didn't have any working capital to make a video. And that was a big concern at the time. So back then, you'd make a record, like a major label release would be several $100,000 in recording budget. I don't even to this day know how much money we spent on the Breakfast at Tiffany's video. I can't imagine. So they shell out that money and the promotion and all that kind of, because you'd have to pay the guy who goes and talks to the radio station and convinces them to let the label pay them to play the song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all the payola and stuff, which was, well, that's another rabbit hole to go down, but that kind of thing doesn't even exist anymore. So on the one hand, the label isn't needed, but on the other hand, it's the investment capital that it takes. Tour support, for instance, when you're trying to break into new markets, even if the label is 100% sure you're going to sell 1 million records, well, you haven't sold any yet. So why on earth would they book you to play in Detroit? Because your record just came out. Well, tour support covers those costs to where you're playing in front of 50 people, or you're playing the radio festival where they're not paying you. The label fronts that money. So that was the purpose. It's still needed. It's still needed maybe now more than ever, but they don't generate the income. And so they can't invest it. Used to would be a label would have success on maybe 1/10 of what they would put out there, but they would make so much money they could afford to risk on 9 other acts that didn't make it. Now it's just a free for all. Yeah,
it's just a zoo now. Well, and I remember it's funny because you can't really certify albums the way you used to, because you guys have a certified gold RAII certified gold album. And they just don't sell records like that anymore. How do you certify a record anymore?
Okay. So here's the thing. It's actually funny because it came up today, because the gold thing had happened a long time ago. So we've long since surpassed that, but you have to audit the label to get whatever the next status is, right? But with streaming, 150,000 plays counts as a single sale. And so I literally just found this out in a call earlier today, that we're like in double platinum status from just streaming.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yes, but it's so intangible. It's like, what does this even mean? Mm-hmm. I just thought it was a humorous kind of tally to hit. Because somebody said, do you realize what you've done? And it's like, no, I don't understand how any of that works. It seems so arbitrary. But, yeah, you're right. It used to be, well, you've sold this many records, therefore you generated this much money and blah, blah, blah. Even from a promotional aspect, it's just simply not there in the same way.
And it's a few years ago now, but I remember hearing a story that there was a particular year, and it was the year that Frozen came out, the animated Disney movie, which I can sing every word to. My daughter loves that movie. But the year that came out, only 2 albums were certified platinum: a Taylor Swift album and the Frozen soundtrack. And nobody else knew how to certify an album. There just wasn't anything that had been put together at that point to figure out how to calculate it. So there were only, in 1988, there were probably 100 platinum albums. Sure. That means 100 million albums were sold.
Right.
And in that year, or probably 2005 or 2010, whatever it was, 2 million albums were sold in the traditional way. And
the thing is, and both of them, I guarantee you, were sold physical copies in Target and Walmart.
Absolutely. You bet they were.
Because Taylor Swift stuck with physical copies for a lot longer than a lot of people did. And that was a pretty smart business decision. But yeah, I think it's because of that kind of thing, they had to completely rework it, to figure out what would constitute this or that. So it's so weird. Dawn of a new age.
So when a band books in your studio, and these, and I'll use the word kids, come in, I'm sure not all of them are kids, but when this young band comes in, and for whatever reason they have enough money to record, and they come in and they're going to cut an album. And maybe you're setting up mics, or you're doing something else, and so you have a few minutes to talk. What do you tell them about the music industry? What kind of advice do you give them to say, just think about this? My advice is always the same, and it's part of the reason that I even really wanted to get into production, is to kind of offer up, some advice, because we did get lucky in a couple of places. The first of which I always say, don't wait on other people. Don't wait on a label. Don't wait on a manager. Don't wait on anything to come and find you. If you want to make a record, just find a way to make a record. Borrow some money, play some gigs, save up, make the best records you can make. And just do it. Just start doing it, because that was part of our process. We were so naive about self-promoting, or even figuring out how to talk to managers or indie labels or anything. We just went and did it on our own. So part of it was ignorance, part of it was cockiness. And the record that made us, that took us all around the world, cost us $2,500 to make. We just went into a small studio. We were just those dumb kids that you were talking about. But we didn't go into it with the idea of making a demo. It was, we were making a record. And we made a record. And Toby's roommate did the artwork. And, it started selling. And that was one of the smart things that Interscope really did, was they didn't want to change it. They didn't want us to re-record it. They just stamped Interscope on it. We remixed a couple of things just to tidy it up a little bit better. And that was it. And so, that's what I always tell people is, you never know what this is going to do. So don't lame out on it. Make it the very best thing you can. That doesn't mean you have to shell out tons of money, but just start doing it.
Because I see all these people a lot of times, I don't know how I'm going to market myself. Like, you haven't done anything. What are you talking about? There's nothing to market. How many shows have you played? Well, I'm trying to find the right venue. I'm like, no, the right venue is the coffee shop on the corner. Go play a stupid gig, and you have to kind of get in that mindset. And once you do, it's incredibly freeing. You do whatever you want. So, some people take you up on the advice.
All right, you touched on this a little bit before, but you talk about radio stations. So when I was in high school, Chicago, which is a tier 1 media market, the only ones that are bigger are New York and LA. And when I was young, LA wasn't as big as Chicago. Now it's bigger, but there was a reason why it was called Second City. Although today it would probably be called Third City, but the Second City Comedy Club was because it was Chicago, not New York.
Okay. Right.
And so when I was a kid, we had the hard rock station, the classic rock.
Loop?
We had the Loop, WLUP,
yes.
which is now closed. We had the alternative indie college station, which was WXRT. Then we had the alternative grunge station, which was Q101. But then we had classic rock, we had modern rock, which today I guess would be called adult contemporary, or I might be flipping those. And then we just had this entire gambit of stations. You could roll up and down the dial, and each station had a format. And then there was the top 40 stations. There was a couple of those. There was the more rap and urban-oriented station. There was one or two of those at the time. So you could just roll up and down the dial and find all of these different genres depicted in individual radio stations. Today, Chicago has the top 40 older, the top 40 younger, the urban
leaning top 40,
the urban leaning top 40, and then a couple of classic rocks.
Yes.
And the day that I heard Jefferson Airplane followed up by Motley Crue, I went, what kind of format is this? How many people just turned and looked at their radio and went, what? Seriously?
Right.
So there used to be this huge diversity of radio that has completely evaporated. And so I guess that's a really long intro to, I don't know how to find new music. I know it's out there. How do people find new music today?
I'll tell you how I find it. I personally think that the YouTube algorithm is pretty stellar. And if it started out, and this is actually how I got really back into listening to metal, is I had discovered a band called Ghost years ago, this Swedish band.
Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah, fantastic songwriting. I mean, just stellar songwriting. Kind of, their first record really sounded like a cross kind of between, Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is super interesting. So I'm kind of fishing around on YouTube, and YouTube picks up on kind of the things I'm searching, and it starts recommending this other stuff, Swedish-based metal groups. And next thing you know, I'm down this rabbit hole. I found, YouTube channels that only play, like Norwegian black metal, for instance. I'm on that. And then, there's a label that has its own page. And so I find lots of music that way. Now, I'm slightly different. Once I find a band that I like, I will go to iTunes and buy the songs. I don't have a service. I don't have, any of the streaming services. But that's how I find it, fishing around online too. There's a great thing, especially metal related, called Encyclopedia Metallum. And I was looking for this one specific band, and what they have on there is all of the various lineups for different bands. And each band member, it shows what other bands they are either currently in or have been in. And so that's another great rabbit hole to go down. But once I discovered how fantastic the YouTube algorithm was for recommending music, well, I would just look for other genres. Like witch house is another genre that I really like. Dark wave and, all that kind of thing. But that's what I do. But you have to be an active participant in it. You have to go looking for it. It's not going to be this cool DJ who happens to be on your same wavelength going, hey, kids, I've got this new track for you. That's not there, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and that's, I think of two bands that I really like, and like The Replacements. That was WXRT. WXRT said, hey, check this out. It was Can't Hardly Wait. The band had just broken up, and I remember listening to the DJ basically crying that The Replacements had broken up, and he was playing a bunch of Replacements tunes. And I was like, oh, this band is great. And now they're gone. I was able to then follow Paul Westerberg a little bit. And Roger Klein and the Peacemakers, although at the time they were The Replacements.
Gotcha.
Or The Refreshments, I'm sorry.
The Refreshments. Yeah.
And it was one of those things where they had a minor hit and then deep dive into their catalog. But now so many of those venues are kind of gone. Although I agree, the YouTube algorithm, which was the Google algorithm, now the Spotify isn't as good.
It's really not.
It's really not.
It sort of, because I've noticed like on our page, and it's like fans also like. I'm like, well, they might, but it seems to be very time specific. Okay, yes, these other artists came out roughly at our same time, but I don't know that our fans currently would necessarily listen to it. It seems a little odd. And even when I'm looking at newer music, I'm going, that doesn't really sound like it. It's not a similar type of artist. You're just kind of using these other factors. Well, it's not as good.
I've always wondered if there was a thumb on the scale with the Spotify algorithm. I've always kind of wondered if there was some promotional behind the scenes.
Yes.
It feels very much like that's the case.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, kind of the smaller radio stations too, because radio did get taken over by, conglomerates and that kind of thing. And what I really miss is more kind of the regionalized content, because I know like specifically within the Chicago area, you would have had the Replacements before. It was kind of in other places, kind of in Minneapolis. There was a whole different scene, sort of, the suburbs were kind of big in that area, and it took a while for it to kind of filter down. Yeah. And that was really kind of the interesting flavor of traveling around and playing new markets, is that you would hear somewhat different music. Of course, the big artists are big in lots of places, but the smaller mid-range artists that you find in a region, that's another thing that has disappeared, because even to make a splash on streaming services, well, that's a nationwide thing. It's not particular to an area necessarily.
Yeah, that's how I found the band. Well, they've got a silly name, but they're out of Denton, Texas, Slobberbone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I was driving. My family's actually from Kentucky, Southern Illinois and Kentucky. And I was driving south, just flipping through radio stations, and landed on a station out of Springfield. And they were doing an in-studio that day.
Okay.
And so they sang a couple of tunes, and I'm like, oh, this band's great. And I always hate it because I'm never going to remember this name. And then they said, oh, and the band's name's Slobberbone. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm going to remember that one.
I think that they were actually from Denton, like we were.
They were from Denton.
They were a Denton band. Okay, yeah I was going to say, wow, that's awesome. See, that's fantastic, and that's what people miss, Wow.
So before I get off into the geeky musical stuff,
yes.
So what albums do really move you? And before you answer. So obviously Home I'm a fan of, and today I was listening to Don't Stop.
Yeah.
And they come from different places. Not totally. There's similarities. I mean, I can tell that these are, similar musicians or the same musicians, and but it comes from a different place. So you've definitely had some transitions in your life that have gone on. Very synth based, although not totally. But it starts off with this kind of repeating synth bed.
Yeah. Well, so that actually comes from, before Toby and I had started what would become Deep Blue Something, we actually were all electronic. We were all drum machines and synthesizers. And
did you have the flock of seagulls hair?
No.
Oh.
Completely. No, because we were very much more into like Cabaret Voltaire.
Rock on, yeah.
And some other things like that. Kind of like much more on the avant-garde thing. I mean, we loved Depeche Mode and things like that, but some Throbbing Gristle, that kind of thing. And we had thought that we would sort of continue in that genre. And in fact, that synthesizer that you hear at the beginning of Don't Stop, I've had that synthesizer since I was 14 years old.
What is it?
It's a Juno 6.
Oh, cool.
Oh, man.
You'd sell that and buy a car.
Oh, I'll never sell it. I've never sold any gear that I've ever owned.
Oh, wow. You still have that Robin bass? Sorry, I'm getting into the geeky stuff.
I do, actually. I'm looking at both of the Robin basses right in front of me right now.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. I like their pickups. They do Rio Grande pickups.
Rio Grande pickups.
I love those pickups. Down. Those are in my telly.
Houston, Texas, absolutely. But so with the home record, that was actually even the beginning of Deep Blue Something. We had to make a conscious decision to not embrace kind of 80s type sound, because it was the most unfashionable thing you could possibly do. And so we made an effort for years and years and years to not touch synthesizers and drum machines and stuff, even though it was to the very core of our musical being. So it was only recently that we just decided, no, we're going to do exactly what we want. And if I feel like adding a synth at the beginning of this song and a drum machine, because John, our drummer, loves drum machines. He thinks he's one of the few drummers that's not threatened by him. He's like, no, let's use this here. So it was a very natural turn for us to kind of head back into that direction. So yeah, that's kind of, and we'll kind of end up continuing in that, I think. Embracing the roots, I guess.
Cool. Because at first when I was listening to it, I clicked on it and it starts off with the synth bed and I'm like, where is this going? Right. And then when it moves into the verses, I'm like, okay, I've got it. I'm here now. I get it. I understand where they're going. It makes sense to me now. And the melody and you have a particular kind of timbre to your voice. And so I'm like, okay, I get this now. And it's cool. It's a cool track. But just when it started off, I was like, not what I was expecting.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, funnily enough, except with the exception of that little synth thing, we have the drum machine right there at the beginning. The entire rest of the song is everything we've ever, it's got the strummy acoustic guitars. Yep. It's got Toby's noodly lead guitar thing. It's everything that you expect. It's just the beginning throws everybody off so much. And I think that's great because it's such a small addition and has like a pretty big impact. That was a fun song to record during our COVID time.
So is that what it is? That's the COVID baby?
We've got a whole bunch of them. Yeah, I went into this wild writing mode, and we just started recording. Yeah, it's actually been really, really productive.
So we're going to see regular singles now, or is there going to be an album that comes out?
No, I think our idea is just to release one song at a time, just because everybody's really, really busy, and it's a little easier to kind of stay focused. And at the same time, if we do have a decision to make of, well, let's kind of turn this direction a little bit. Well, if you turn that direction and everyone hates it, well, you can change for the next song as opposed to making a whole different album, So I think it will give us the opportunity to be, a little bit more experimental because it's just sort of a one song at a time investment.
So you're not going to do your Chris Gaines where you become the country band this time?
Well, I didn't think about that till you just said it.
Oh,
maybe that's a good plan. I don't know, man. I think I could do a lot of things. I just don't think I could satisfactorily fake country. I don't have that perspective, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, so let me dive into the geeky gear stuff, if you don't mind.
Okay. Man, all you want.
So I before the show started, I asked you about your GNLs because I'm on your Instagram, and so I was thumbing through the pictures today, and you had these two look like custom shop GNLs.
Mm-hmm.
And green and blue. And I was like, wow, those are great. But,
yes.
GNL is not a brand that jumps immediately to mind for a lot of bassists or a lot of musicians. And my friend's store actually sells GNL, so they've always stayed kind of on my mind.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And so I guess, but then you said, yeah, but I just signed with Aria.
Yeah.
So Aria Pro, right?
Yes.
So
Aria Pro.
Tell me about that.
Okay. So I got to tell you a brief GNL story. Okay. So my first bass that I had was a Univox violin shaped bass.
Cool.
Which is actually right over my shoulder there. And it sounds great, but in a very kind of, beatly kind of way.
Yeah.
And it didn't work because I was in a, high school band and we played lots of Van Halen and it needed to be a little bit more kind of rock. And we had gone to this music store and I was looking at this purple metal flake star-shaped bass.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Cost like $200 or something, right? But I was like, oh yes, it will be mine. And I was sitting there playing it, and I progressed on the bass guitar very, very quickly. It came very naturally to me. I feel at home on it now. So I was over there kind of rocking away, and my mom was with me. And this kid who was like our salesman pulled her to the side and said, and he was barely older than me, and I could tell he was nervous. And I could hear them having this conversation. He said, "Look, I don't want to sound like a salesman, but if you buy that bass, you're going to be right back in here next year because he's going to be sick of it and he's going to be embarrassed and it's not any good and he's too good a player. You can't buy that." And she was like, "No, I appreciate that. What do you recommend? Something else." And he said, "We just got this in. It's a new brand. It's Leo Fender's new brand. It's called GNL. And we're giving them, since it's new, we're trying to establish, we're giving them great deals on this." And so, she said, "Todd, will you take a look at this one?" And I was like, "You've got to be kidding me." Because it was like, it was a L1000. And she said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, this is amazing. Of course it's amazing. Yes, it's much better than that stupid purple metal flake thing." And so I ended up with that L1000 and I still have it. And so I loved that bass. And the only reason I ended up touring with the Robins is because I was worried that something was going to happen to that GNL. And so years later, I've gotten a couple more ones, that blue one and the green one and that kind of thing. And those were my main touring basses for a long time, but they're solid instruments. But man, that kid probably helped me out quite a bit, on my trajectory as a player. So I'm glad he got the guts up to try to convince my mom to buy something different.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
So how did it work out with Aria?
So the other day, so first, always giant John Taylor fan. Writes the best bass lines, just perfect for the song, sometimes very intricate, sometimes very simple, but the exact right kind of bass line. So I always thought, even when people just were ragging on Duran Duran, I was like, no, you're missing it. They play interesting things. And I always wanted an Aria bass, just like what he played. But I never saw one. They were never really marketed in the United States. They had some tariff issues and that kind of thing. So you saw a lot of English guys, like the guy from Spandau Ballet played one. Jack Bruce actually from Cream ended up playing one, but I never saw one in person for like years and years. And so very recently, again, on YouTube, fishing through there, and I saw this guy and he said, "I'm celebrating a new relationship with Aria Japan. And because of that, I'm going to play the entire Rio album from start to finish." So I thought, well, that's a super cool thing to do, kind of a nod to John Taylor. But then I thought, I've never heard of this guy. Why does he have a relationship with Aria Japan? So I thought, well, I need to give it a shot. So I got online and I reached out to their professional rep. And, they said, "Hey, send us in, $5 bio and all that kind of stuff. So send in all the information. They got right back to me and they said, we'd love to have you. Because they just have released these again. And they're trying to make some headway, even though it's going to be kind of into 2021 before they can. And they set me up with this beautiful red SB 1000, and it's unreal. It's absolutely it arrived here at the house, and I got out because my son was going, "Now you're doing what now?" Because my son's a bass player too.
Ah, cool.
Because he was like, I don't see how anything's going to be better than the blue G&L. I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. And he plays Music Man too, and he loves his Music Man.
Okay.
And I said, no, I think you're going to be surprised when this thing gets here. It's a totally different design. And it arrived, and it was just like, oh my God. And he ended up playing a gig with it. He's played it live before. I still haven't. We haven't had any shows. So he's actually used it on a couple of shows. But it's phenomenal. It's amazing to record with. The design is truly unique. I can't wait to get on and play some shows with it.
Well, it's kind of fun too, because John Taylor, because of being locked up at his house, has started doing instructional videos. Oh man, yeah, and they're tons of fun too.
And they're great. He's really, really good at it. Because especially breaking down how they wrote the thing. And he's a really personable guy, and his little anecdotes. Oh, yeah. I watch every single one of them.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to play Rio. I thought that was pretty great.
Absolutely.
Well, just since we're talking gear for a second, you mentioned your son plays Music Man.
Yeah.
My friend owns a guitar store, and I am absolutely blown away. Like when I was a kid, let me jump back in time. So it's 1988. Dad, can I get a guitar? Dad, I want a guitar. Will you get me a guitar? So we go to the store, and I'm like, whatever you do, don't buy me a Dean, or don't buy this, or don't buy that. And I end up getting this guitar, and it was cool. And I still have it. I played it a ton. My son has it now. But it was amazing to me that there was junk, absolute junk. There were guitars that were junk, that were virtually unplayable out of the box.
Okay.
But today, that's not a thing. You can walk into the guitar store and pick up a $300 LTD, and it plays fantastic. Maybe the hardware isn't stellar. Right. Maybe it needs new pickups. Maybe it needs new tuners. But the playability. And so here we are lamenting that lots of kids aren't into music, and the industry has changed. And yet never, I don't think, has there been a time when it's better to be a musician. The little I.O. that I've got is phenomenal. I mean, you have a studio. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's part of it is, computer machining. It's easier to make, solid quality guitars at, lower costs. I think people are much more prone to buy something that feels good. People are pretty still brand conscious, but yeah, you can't deny it. I actually have a sub series bass from Music Man, and it was a $200 thing. We just happened to be that my son wanted something a little bit better. He was playing in jazz band in junior high, and he wanted something that was his own, and I didn't want it to get torn up. And I bought him that. I thought, my gosh, this is incredible. This is a $200, Sterling sub series. That's, it's a lower range Music Man. It sounds amazing. It sounds every bit like a traditional Music Man. It's just a different age. It's a shame that people are less educated in music, because the opportunity is there. I mean, I still have that first synthesizer. For the price of one real synthesizer, you can get 100 software versions of it. You can have every synth at your fingertips. It's technically an amazing era.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. So how do people find you?
We're not super active on social media, but the easiest thing really is to go to Spotify or Apple Music and just follow the band. Don't just be a casual monthly listener, but, follow us. We do the Instagram and that kind of thing too. We keep our news up to date. But in the last couple of years, we've decided to be more active in that kind of thing. So we're in all the usual spots, and trying to find ways to reach new people, and just kind of, we're taking this new era on as sort of an experiment to kind of to see what's possible. I mean, we came out of the indie band realm, we felt very comfortable, the kind of the DIY ethic. We've got a studio, I'm just going to keep making records and stuff.
Awesome. Well, Todd, I cannot thank you enough. I really appreciate you being on, especially because this is a brand new podcast. This is a fledgling podcast, and we're doing great. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to a little shop.
Well, absolutely. And man, I'm, from what you mentioned, I'm really looking forward to the next few guests you have. So, I'll be a listener as well. So thanks for having me on. It's awesome.
That's great. I appreciate it. This was Todd Pipes with Deep Blue Something, as well as a solo artist, and keep listening.